Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. Thank you so very much for joining me this evening, wherever you are in the world. And I hope that you're in incredibly good shape and that you're in top form and that you've had a fabulous day. And before you get cozy and comfortable, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. Now, when it comes to our Bigfoot encounter tonight, just consider for a moment these long-haul truck drivers that go down our roads here in North America, and they are always wondering to themselves, what are they going to see tonight? Because they have had so many encounters that we could hardly imagine. So let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, I was a long-haul truck driver for about 10 long years. And believe me, I've seen things on the roads of North America that would literally make your hair curl. From dreadful fatalities, awful car accidents, crazy drunken idiots, strange, peculiar-looking bystanders, Bigfoots, and even ghostly encounters, and the lists of oddities quite literally goes on and on. Some of my stories defy natural explanation, so if anyone's got some interesting stories to tell you, it's invariably those of us that are on the roads for all those ungodly hours, especially those of us that drive during the night. It is odd because when anomalous things happen, they do seem to occur between 2:30 and 4 a.m. in the morning. I know of other truckers whom have had their own scandalous stories to tell that I am sure will be of interest to you and your listeners, so I will encourage them to get in touch with you, provided of course that they can remain exclusively anonymous. Some of us are terribly afraid to come forward with our bizarre stories for fear of being ridiculed, because believe me, some of our stories are just that, bizarre. Being a long-haul truck driver is an inflexible life because you literally are eating and sleeping in your truck. The only way you make money is if your truck is literally on the move. In a day I can travel 600 miles and a week easily about 3,000. And double that if you have a driving partner, which unfortunately I don't have. Most of your driving is invariably done on highways, which does mean you cannot always just stop to go sightseeing, even when you go through some exquisite, captivating areas. I have sometimes flouted that rule from time to time, but most drivers are much more vigilant than I am about the clock. For me personally, the natural world has a powerful hold over me, and nothing beats a good view, and even a light brisk walk in some crisp mountain air. The trouble with being a truck driver is you're literally getting no exercise whatsoever, and living off non-perishable junk food can have a catastrophic effect on your waistline, your blood pressure, your cholesterol, liver, and the very increased likelihood of developing diabetes along the way. All these inevitable disadvantages of an unavoidable sedentary lifestyle. Of course, some truck stops do have gyms where you can work out, but I promise you, when you've been focusing on the open road for hours at a time, exercise is quite literally the last thing on your mind. After being seated for so long, you do develop these uncomfortable aches and pains in various parts of your body, so all you want to do is to stretch them out, eat a good meal, and get some well-needed shut-eye. Having a hot shower is a luxury you can ill afford when you're always on the move, and it's only when you stop at the special plazas that you can indulge yourself with a good wash, which does mean that showering every day is most likely unlikely. Believe me, driving distances makes you grimy, sweaty, sticky and mucky, and it just seems to glue itself to you, which is so unpleasant. So I always carry tons of wet wipes with me, sanitizers and dry shampoo, because everything helps. When I was trucking, it became my home for 10 long years, and instead of making do with the sleeper bunks they provide in the back, I purchased myself a decent mattress and a comfy duvet, which made all the difference. You cannot bypass the need for a good sleep, and it's a rule you cannot afford to flout, because believe me, there can be some dreadful accidents out there on those roads. Some drivers are so desperate to meet their delivery windows and deadlines that they end up driving too fast and recklessly, taking risks that they can ill afford to take, sometimes resulting in fatalities, which is not a joke. At that time of my life, I was driving shipments for weeks at a time, and when I did get to go home, I had to do grocery shopping to stock up for my next long-haul trip, as well as do washing and ironing, so it was hardly long enough to get some real quality time to spend with my family, whom I would miss dreadfully much while I was away. My poor wife had to man the fort, looking after our 2 children, Angel, who was 6, and Paddy, 9 at the time. However, when you need to provide for your family, there really are not any options available to you when it comes to putting bread on the table, so to speak. And truck driving jobs are always in demand, for they always need truck drivers. So it was an easy way to bring in a pay package. Truck driving didn't pay me well in the beginning, but over the years I got paid infinitely better and ended up getting a sizable salary because I had a lot of experience under my belt, no accidents on the road, as well as always making my deliveries on time, which had a huge positive effect on my income and salary. Anyway, now that I've given you a rough outline of my general lifestyle on the open road, let me get into some of the strange, queer, very bizarre stories that I encountered on those North American roads. I guess driving through the witching hours on the highway at night does predispose you to strange, somewhat peculiar encounters. Of course, driving at night does have its distinct drawbacks, I can assure you, which including becoming overtired because of the natural biorhythms of your body, as your body is naturally predisposed to being asleep at night, and this can impair your attention span on the road. Then, of course, there is the reduced visibility on the road and the potential of being exposed to crime, which does happen from time to time, as well as getting a reduced mediocre after-hours service from dispatch, which is a huge drawback. However, there are less obstacles on the road and so much less traffic, so you can get a whole lot more driving under your belt, and that's what naturally appealed to me. So there I was, out on the open road at night, and it was about 2:30 p.m, so you could call that early morning. But as far as I'm concerned, it's still night, when everything around you is very dusky and dark. I had been driving for about several hours straight, without any obstacles on the road and virtually no traffic. It was very still, and it was a noiseless, very quiet night, and even though I was in my truck, it did feel particularly heavy. I distinctly remember that. The evening seemed oppressive, and it had a rather menacing ambience about it, despite the beautiful pearling moon and the twinkling light of the silvery stars. Something felt distinctly off, but I didn't know exactly what it was. Suddenly I saw the sylph-like willowy figure of a very lurid-faced white woman in a flowing black dress, standing in the middle of the road, waving me down frantically as if she needed my help. What the heck, I thought. What is that woman doing in the middle of the road? Is she completely deranged or stark raving mad? I slowed down my track, heaved open the door and climbed out, surveying the whole area and looking for the woman. But she was nowhere to be seen. I looked over to my left and then to my right, but she was gone. She was nowhere to be seen, and I was just met with the placidity of the night. But I did get this airy feeling that I was being watched by very pugnacious evil eyes, and it literally caused the hair on the neck to stand on end. It really felt very ghoulish, and even the trees in the distance were swaying in a menacing way, only adding to the airy creepiness of that dreadful night. I thought it was all really odd, because I had seen the woman so clearly in the road, and she appeared to just vanish before my eyes. Where had she gone, I wondered? How was that even remotely possible, for her to just vanish so quickly like that? Was I overtired or imagining things, I wondered? I slipped back into my seat, sighing heavily and muttering to myself under my breath as I started up the engine and manoeuvred my truck out into the middle of the road, meditating on what had just happened. It was all very bizarre. Suddenly, everything in my truck became freezing cold, so cold that I felt like I was standing in a freezer box. I suddenly sensed this evil malaise. I know of no other way to describe it to you. And then I glanced over to the passenger seat, and there was this big, black, dark shadow. And it became like a large, big, black cloud, and then it started to take on a physical form all of its own. And suddenly, sitting near me, was the woman that was in black, that I had seen standing in the middle of the road. I was utterly terrified, and I let out a shrill scream, and the woman gave me a very slow, vile, toothless smile. I immediately pulled over to the side of the road and leapt out of my truck as swiftly as I could, not knowing what I should do. I cautiously peered into my truck, and I was glad to see that the woman had gone. But where had she gone? I breathed a huge sigh of relief, hopped back into my truck, and proceeded to drive, and suddenly there she was in the middle of the road again, beckoning to me. My heart was beating so fast, and my hands became clammy with sweat, but I drove right through the woman, and as I did this she let out the most gut-wrenching scream that sounded like she was being murdered. I looked through my rear mirror, and I could see her standing in the middle of the road, oscillating her fists at me angrily, and without a shadow of a doubt, I realised that I'd actually seen a ghost. I had never believed that such a thing was real, but now I had witnessed and seen one for the first time in my life. Bear in mind, I had never believed in the paranormal before, but after this very peculiar experience, I was forced to change my perception about things, which wasn't easy by any means, because I'm a deeply cynical guy. And until my ghostly encounter, I had pretty much believed that this life was all there was, and there was no hereafter. For a long time I did not share my strange encounter with anyone, until two truck drivers I knew, who frequent that same highway at night, both shared with me similar rendezvous with a strange woman in black, who flagged them down and then vanished before their eyes, only to reappear in their truck moments later. "Whatever you do, you must not stop for her," said the one driver. "I've seen her a few times on that stretch of highway, and I drive straight through her, and she screams out in agony, but I just ignore her and proceed on my way. I always see her gestating furiously through the rear mirror. No one has any idea what this apparition story is and why she flags you down on the highway. But one thing I know is that this woman is evil, and her intentions are iniquitous. For days after that encounter, there was a strange sulphurous smell in my truck that just would not go away, no matter how much I cleaned the truck. It also seemed to cling to my body like a heavy glue, so that wherever I went, and no matter how much I washed, people would look at me and say, "What's that smell?" knowing that it was emanating from me, and truly I smelt like a rotting corpse. I did try to avoid people for a while, because everywhere I went, people would wrinkle up their nose and whisper behind my back that I smelt like a skunk. That must have lasted for about 3 days, until finally it dissipated, but I've never been so self-conscious in my entire life. I could hardly say, "Excuse me, it's not me that smells, but a vile witch that I picked up on the highway." Another ghostly encounter happened again on the highway. It was in the middle of the night, and I saw someone standing on the side of the road, trying to wave me down and get my attention. I normally do not stop for hitchhikers, and after that dreadful incident with the woman in black, I was not eager to pick up any bystanders. However, there was something intriguing about this guy that was so non-threatening and desperate, so I pulled over to the side of the road and offered him a lift, which I tell you is something I am not inclined to do, especially now, and certainly not at the best of times. So I have no idea what made me stop for him, but I did. When he got into my truck, I noticed that the clothes he was wearing looked like he was from the 1800s, as he was wearing long black pants with a long white buttoned shirt and a pair of braces. But I thought that he was a little eccentric, or maybe he was actually Amish. He had a strong southern drawl and a very nice warm manner about him. I asked him what he was doing on the highway in the middle of the night. He said he needed to get help as his farmhouse was ablaze and his daughter and wife were trapped in the fire. I asked him if he had phoned 911 yet, and he said that help was coming with the horses and with Mr. Finley. I thought it was all decidedly odd, because what was he doing in my truck taking a lift with me if his farmhouse was ablaze? Surely he should be waiting for help to arrive and not taking a lift with me on the highway in the middle of the night. I was just about to cross-examine him when he suddenly asked me to stop. "Ah," he said, "there's Mr. Finley with the horses. Thankfully he's come. Help has arrived at last." I stopped the truck, rubbing my eyes in total disbelief. I kid you not, there in the middle of the road, larger than life, were two magnificent black horses that were neighing. They were pulling a buggy with a rider dressed in black, with a large top hat, holding the reins. I rubbed my eyes in total disbelief, because what I was seeing was so real. It wasn't a hallucination, but it looked like I was watching a clip from another time. I scrutinized the man getting into the buggy, and I heard the reins being flicked by the driver as he urged the horses ever onwards and forwards, and the sounds of the horses' hooves trotted away, but everything faded from my sight, getting dimmer and dimmer, until finally they all just vanished before my eyes. I knew immediately that this had been another ghostly encounter. Whether it was a time lapse in our reality or a glitch in the fabric of time, I do not know, but I promise you it was real, and it did indeed happen. One night I was driving, and suddenly I felt that fogginess creep over me, and I knew that I was falling asleep at the wheel and would have to pull over to the road for a while to have a little shut-eye. I knew that if I didn't listen to my body clock, I would regret it, and I was so frustrated. It was so inconvenient to feel so sleepy right now. You know that feeling when you're too busy to eat, but your hunger has other ideas and stops you in the middle of your tracks when you just want to focus on what you're doing? It was just like that. I pulled over to the side of the road and parked my truck, and then I went to bed to get some sleep. I was awoken a couple of hours later to these huge slapping sounds on the side of my truck, and a very clear sound of something being dragged on the ground. It sounded like a very large foot of some kind. I got up immediately to see what was actually going on. I used my flashlight to get a better view, but I saw absolutely nothing. Then there was a loud clamouring sound as if something was trying to get on top of my container. I was sure I heard something walking all over the container, and it sounded like a herd of rhinos had been let loose. Whatever this thing was, it sounded heavy. I was so terrified by then, but then the noise just suddenly seemed to stop, as suddenly as it had started, and everything became exceedingly quiet. So I returned to bed, very perplexed about what had just happened, but frankly far too tired to care. I woke up at about 5 o'clock that morning, and luckily it was getting lighter outside, but I still took a flashlight with me, as I needed to relieve myself before my journey. And then as I was coming back from my ablutions, I suddenly saw something that caught my attention on top of my shipping container. It looked like a massive shaggy coat, or lots of shaggy coats piled on top of each other. My first reaction is, what the heck is that? It looked like someone had offloaded tons and tons of their dirty fur coats that they no longer wanted or needed, and were way too lazy to take to the dumpster, so they had piled on top of my shipping container in a mangled heap. I wouldn't have been surprised at all if that was the case, because people were very weird. As I got close to my truck, I could hear this loud snoring sound, and then I realised very suddenly that this whole lot of fleecy coats was in fact one fleecy coat that belonged to a strange creature that was lying on top of my container. I noticed a few dried but bloody stains on the side of my truck that looked like drag marks. Whatever this creature was, it must have injured one of its feet. And that must have been the very creature that had clambered on top of my container during the night, making all those strange sounds. I could detect a very offensive smell in the air that smelt very rough, like stale urine and perspiration and cheesy trainers rolled into one. I decided to get back into my truck and just hope that whatever this creature was, that it would move off on its own accord later on. I did not know what it was, but I had no desire to tackle it, and so I chose to move on my way with my journey, and that's exactly what I did. I drove straight for about 6 solid hours, and then I pulled over to the side of the road to relieve myself once again behind a large tree I'd spotted. Another unfortunate side effect of being a trucker. I looked towards the top of my shipping container to see if that fleecy creature was still there. I secretly hoped it had gone. And there it was. Suddenly I saw this big shaggy form moving, and then it rose up on 2 hind legs. The creature was colossal, and was at least 8 foot tall, 700 pounds, and 4.5 feet wide. It had the most enormous shoulders I've ever seen, and a large cone-shaped head. It was covered from head to toe with long silvery grey hair, and I realised immediately that I was seeing an elderly Bigfoot who had injured his foot very badly. I could see him dragging it on the top of the container, and I heard him made a few painful grunts, as if his foot was giving him a lot of pain. He stood erect on the container like an imposing, statuesque monster. I watched the Bigfoot study the view from the motorway that stretched back into vast areas of natural forest. He seemed to be getting his coordinates sorted in his head, judging by the way he was studying the terrain. And then he seemed satisfied about where he was, and then he bounced off the container with the agility of a domestic cat, making sure not to land on his injured foot. I watched him jump over the very high guardrail, as if it was nothing, walk through a clearing, down an embankment, towards a wood full of pine trees, and then he was gone. He moved with a flawless fluidity despite the impediment of his injured foot, which he dragged behind him precariously. I watched in awe, amazed to realise that this creature had clearly hitchhiked a lift with me on the back of my shipping container. I marvelled at the intelligence of this creature for thinking outside of the box to get to a different location faster, as I imagine his injured foot was holding him back. These creatures are like nomads that move from one place to another, following waterways or electric pylons. That was my guess. I was amazed to realise that this Bigfoot was indeed real, and not the legendary creature I had often believed him to be. There were other truckers who claimed to have seen Bigfoots before, but now that I'd seen him, I knew he was real. Not once during my observations of this strange creature did I actually feel any fear, but all I felt was awe and admiration for this lofty, majestic creature that had crossed my path in such a spectacular way. Another time I was driving on the highway, there were these huge balls of light that looked like orbs literally wheeling past my truck towards the cemetery. I literally parked my truck on the side of the road to follow these orbs of light. It was like watching a warm bunch of butterflies winging off, and it was so beautiful to watch. The light orbs seemed insightful, and so I watched them pirouetting around the graves, and then they all flew into this huge mausoleum. And then I physically saw that mausoleum door that was firmly shut open very slowly and cautiously. And then I saw a shadowy form walking out and looking in my direction. That freaked me out, as you can imagine, so I hightailed it back to my truck and started the engine as quickly as I could, scolding myself vehemently for being too curious for my own good. As I started up my engine, I felt this cold air blowing against my face, and then I drove down the middle of the highway, and then I saw the most terrifying creature I have ever seen standing in the middle of the road with an agog look on its face. I say that because I felt like he was waiting for me. The creature looked like a big monkey, and he was standing on 2 legs with a long tail, and he was walking around like a human being, but he wasn't human. and he had the most ghastly, ferocious red eyes that I have ever seen. And he looked into my eyes, and I felt the most atrocious chill engulf my entire body, like I was standing in sub-zero conditions. Was this another kind of Bigfoot, I wondered to myself? But the critter was evil, and I could sense and feel it. It was colossal. It was about 400 to 500 pounds, and it had a massive head, and it had very sharp teeth. The creature was roaring and growling and snarling at me simultaneously, and then it actually pounced on my windscreen and was scratching the grass with its talons, as if he was trying to find a way to get into my vehicle to tear me apart. It was absolutely terrifying. I am not ashamed to admit that I was frightened to death. I knew that if this creature got into my truck, he would have killed me without a doubt. I am certain of that. I was utterly, utterly terrified. My heart was pounding through my chest, and I began to scream. And I screamed, and I screamed. Suddenly I saw the light orbs again coming back from that graveyard, and then this strange monkey-like creature, whatever it was with the very long tail, appeared to follow the light orbs, and then it vanished from my sight. I was hyperventilating so much. I've never been so terrified in all my life, and I have no idea what this creature was, and what on earth those orbs were. But one thing I can tell you for sure, they were very evil. After those nightly encounters on the road, I chose to opt for some day driving instead. All these years later, I'm no longer a trucker, but for all you skeptics out there, I want to assure you that there are things out there that defy natural understanding. Some are good, others evil. But that is my story. Well, I just want to say thank you so very much for that incredible story. I'm blown away by it. I can't imagine what it must have been like to see that woman in the middle of the road and to suddenly have her sitting next to you in her truck. In your truck. That must have been absolutely terrifying. And certainly those light orbs. And as for the Bigfoot, taking a trip on the back of your truck on the top of the shipping container, that was genius of the creature. Anyway, until next time, goodbye and good night.